Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Ace defeated Blackbeard during their duel? How would this change the story overall, and what would happen to Ace afterward? Well, after Ace defeats Blackbeard, his Titanic captains would be shocked. But considering they are a bunch of criminals and murderers, none of them would even bother avenging their late captain and would likely go their own separate ways. The only one who might stay behind is Jesus Burgess, who seems a bit more loyal than the rest. He would instantly attempt to get revenge on Ace, but this wouldn't end very well for him. I mean, think about it. In the main story, the guy got dominated by Sabo on Dressrosa. So what chance does he have against Ace? That's right, none. After both Burgess and Blackbeard are defeated, Ace would begin his journey back to Whitebeard in order to give him the good news. It would take a few days, but once he arrives at the Moby Dick, the crew would brand him a hero for avenging Thatch. After some celebration, Whitebeard will probably tell Ace that Shanks came to visit while he was away in order to warn them all about Blackbeard. Ace would be happy to hear that Shanks was worried about him and would remember the time they partied on a certain winter island. For the next few days, things would calm down and everything would return to normal, with Ace going back to his duties as the 2nd Division captain. However, his world would instantly shatter once he gets the news that Luffy and his entire crew are apparently dead. Ace would be furious and would ask Whitebeard to let him go to 𝐕𝐴𝐷𝐒 to investigate what happened. Ace would start asking locals about the incident with Kuma and the Straw Hats, but he wouldn't learn anything useful. However, due to talking to so many people, news would eventually spread about Ace being on the island. That information will soon reach Rayleigh as well, who would personally arrive at Ace's location. Rayleigh would then ask Ace to follow him to his bar while also revealing to him who he is, leaving Ace shocked. When they arrive, Rayleigh would share what he heard directly from Kuma and would reveal to Ace that his brother is actually alive. Relieved, Ace would thank Rayleigh for everything before returning to Whitebeard. However, the funny thing is that just as Ace leaves, Luffy would return to 𝐕𝐴𝐷𝐒. You see, since Ace wasn't captured this time around, it also means that the Marineford War wouldn't happen. This then means that Luffy wouldn't go to Impel Down to rescue Ace and would instead return to 𝐕𝐴𝐷𝐒 to reunite with his crew. So does this mean that the time skip wouldn't happen? Well, not really. This is because as soon as the Straw Hats return, Rayleigh would realize that Luffy simply isn't strong enough to survive in the new world, and after what happened with Kuma, he would convince the Straw Hats to stay with him and train. So even though the Straw Hats wouldn't be separated, the time skip would still happen, and we can assume that it would last for around 2 years, as in the original. It's also important to mention that the One Piece world overall would be quite different in this version of the story. First of all, considering Blackbeard is dead, all prisoners would remain in Impel Down, including Buggy, Mr. 2, Mr. 3, and Crocodile. Another interesting thing is that Sengoku wouldn't retire. Although we can't be sure about this, I feel like it's the war that pushed Sengoku to finally leave his position, and since the war wouldn't happen this time around, he would continue being the fleet admiral. So Aokiji and Akainu wouldn't end up fighting each other on Punk Hazard and would both retain their admiral positions. Now, while the Straw Hats are busy training, Ace would set out on his own journey to fulfill a certain promise he made to someone. That's right, I believe that at this point in the story, Ace would actually try to liberate Wano from Kaido. Now, I doubt Whitebeard would risk going to full-out war against beast pirates, so it's more likely he would only allow Ace to take a couple of crewmates and do this mission more quietly. Ace would soon arrive on Wano with a small group, which would probably include Jozu, Marco, and a few other commanders. So can this group actually defeat Kaido and finally save Wano from his tyranny? Well, it's not gonna be that easy. You see, although Ace is pretty strong, he is still nowhere close to Kaido in terms of strength. The only option Ace's group would have here is to try and rally as many samurai and citizens as they can and convince them to fight with them. And although that worked in the main story, without Kinemon and Momonosuke there to help, it's really unlikely Ace would be able to convince anyone. So his only option would be to bring the fight straight to Kaido, and considering the sheer size of his crew, Ace and his friends would be utterly defeated. After barely escaping Wano with his life, Ace would vow once again that he'll come back when the time is right. For now, his new objective would probably be to assist Jinbei with the Hody Jones situation after noticing that several pirate ships on the Fishman Island have gone missing. Eventually, after 2 years, the Straw Hats will finally finish their training and continue their journey. This time, they would effortlessly reach Punk Hazard without any delays, since Hody Jones would already be dealt with by Ace and Jinbei. The Straw Hats would then meet Kinemon and Momonosuke on Punk Hazard, which would be a completely normal island this time around, since Akainu and Aokiji's duel never took place. As in the original, Straw Hats will find a way to defeat Caesar with Smoker's help, and they'll leave the island after forming an alliance with Law. However, since 𝐂𝐄𝐃 never resigned from the Marines, does that mean Smoker would be killed by 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝐻𝗄? Well, maybe, but I believe there's a chance 𝐂𝐄𝐃 might show up on Punk Hazard on some unofficial sword business. For example, he might be sent there to investigate Virgo because the Marines suspect him to be a spy. So he would save Smoker from 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄, same as in the original. Another important thing is that in this version of the story, there was no need for the global draft for new Marine admirals, meaning that Green Bull and Fujitora wouldn't be important characters at all. This is why I believe that 𝐂𝐄𝐃 would be the one to go to Dressrosa this time around instead of Fujitora. He would probably volunteer to do this so he can keep a close eye on 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄. Anyway, with no Colosseum event to distract the Straw Hats, things would get heated much faster. The Revolutionary Army members would most likely side with the Straw Hats in order to tear down 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄's weapons factories. This would give Luffy time to meet some of the army's members and his long-lost brother Sabo. But would Sabo even remember Luffy in this version? You see, since the Marineford War never happened, it also means that Sabo never regained his memories, so he wouldn't recognize Luffy at first. However, after taking a closer look at Luffy's face, his memories would start flooding back in, and he'd burst into tears. With Sabo on his side, Luffy and Law will be well equipped to handle the entire situation on Dressrosa. Seeing that 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄 would likely get defeated soon, 𝗂𝐄𝐃 wouldn't intervene and would gladly let the Straw Hats get rid of him. During all the fighting, Luffy would get the opportunity to see Sabo showcasing his superior haki, which would motivate Luffy even more to catch up to his powerful older brother. Since Luffy would come face to face with 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄, and although it wouldn't be easy, he would manage to defeat him using Gear 4. Witnessing how 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄 was ready to sacrifice the entire country and the lack of action taken against him by the world government, 𝗂𝐄𝐃 would officially quit the Marines to pursue his own justice. While all this is happening, Ace would be busy performing submissions for Whitebeard around the world. However, he would immediately stop everything he's doing once he gets a message about Whitebeard's condition worsening. Ace would instantly hurry back to the ship, only to find Pops on his deathbed. After sharing a heartfelt moment with his crew, Whitebeard will pass away with an intimidating pose on his giant chair. Now, it might seem weird to you that Whitebeard would die so soon, but you have to remember that this guy was so sick that he had to be connected to medical equipment at all times, even pre-time skip, and couldn't even use haki anymore. So it makes sense that after the time skip, his illness would finally catch up to him. Anyways, following his funeral, the Whitebeard pirates would disband, and Ace would return to being an independent pirate once again. The Spade Pirates, Ace's old crew, would then likely regroup, and the first thing they would do is travel to Fishman Island to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands following Whitebeard's death. Soon enough, some of Big Mom pirates would arrive on the island to claim it, but the Spade Pirates, along with Jinbei, will stand their ground, putting the island under their protection. However, although they were successful in defeating Big Mom pirates for now, Ace and Jinbei would soon realize that Big Mom's attacks will never stop unless they confront her directly. So, leaving Fishman Island behind with the Ryugu army in charge, the Spade Pirates would set sail for Todo Land. Arriving on the island, they'd face a ton of resistance, but Ace's crew would eventually reach Whole Cake. Funnily enough, Ace would arrive there at the same time the Straw Hats do, and would be absolutely shocked seeing Luffy there. I imagine this would probably be his reaction. However, there would be no time for Luffy to explain why he was there, as Cracker would soon arrive to stop them. Fighting together, the duo, along with Nami, would easily defeat Cracker, but would then quickly evacuate the area before Big Mom's entire army arrives. Finding a moment to catch their breath, the brothers will share a moment together in order to discuss how they both ended up at Whole Cake Island at the same time. At first, Ace would judge Luffy for coming to save Sanji since he left the crew on his own, and Luffy shouldn't go around chasing him. However, after realizing that Sanji is pretty much like family to Luffy, Ace would sympathize with his little brother. During their chat, Ace will also find out from Luffy that Sabo is alive somehow, and has actually helped Luffy deal with 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗻𝗄. Ace would be absolutely shocked by this, and would make a promise to Luffy that all three of them would meet again someday. Anyways, after that, both crews will part ways in order to carry out their parts of the plan. Ace will focus on targeting Big Mom, whilst Luffy will focus on retrieving Sanji. In the process, Luffy will form an alliance with the Fire Tank Pirates again. The Straw Hats will then crash the wedding the same way they did in the main story, only this time, Ace will be watching everything unfold from the shadows. All of the chaos Luffy has caused would completely destroy Ace's own assassination plan, and he would be pretty mad at his little brother for being so reckless. Ace would let things play out a bit up until the point Katakuri jumps into the fray. Sensing that Luffy is not quite strong enough to face off against a monster like Katakuri, Ace would immediately interrupt their battle in order to give his brother and his crew a chance to escape. However, Luffy being Luffy would obviously not abandon his brother and would stand by to watch the battle between Ace and Katakuri unfold. Using his Devil Fruit abilities, Ace would easily gain the upper hand against his enemy. But the situation would quickly change once Katakuri starts fully utilizing his advanced observation haki and landing some devastating punches on Ace. Fearing for Ace's safety, Luffy would begin to analyze Katakuri's movements and would jump in to save his brother just before Katakuri finishes him off. Eventually, with a combined effort, both brothers will overcome Katakuri at last and join their crews in escaping the Whole Cake Island. Ace would then meet Pedro for the first time, and together they'll team up to melt down 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏's candy, which means that Pedro won't have to sacrifice himself this time around. As they make their escape, they'll be surrounded by enemy ships, which will prompt the Spade Pirates to abandon their own ship and get on board 𝐻𝐿 Sunny. Then with one strong coup de burst, the Sunny will launch into the sky, away from Big Mom's children. Finally, after all this, Spade Pirates and the Straw Hats would have some time to bond with each other and discuss their future plans. A few days will roll by, and during their journey, Ace, Luffy, and Sanji will receive their new bounties. Ace would be a little annoyed, but ultimately happy that his little brother's bounty surpassed his own. In those same newspapers, Ace and Luffy would learn about what happened to Sabo during the reverie, which would leave both of them speechless. Luffy will then reveal to Ace that he plans to go to Wano next in order to defeat Kaido. Ace would be shocked to hear this and would beg Luffy not to do it, as he knows firsthand how dangerous Kaido can be. However, after seeing that Luffy won't back down, Ace would agree to help, as both brothers promised the same thing in the past, to free the land of Wano from its tyranny. However, it won't be easy, because in this version of the story, Big Mom and Kaido won't hesitate to team up a lot sooner, considering how troublesome Ace and Luffy can be together. So can the two brothers working together finally defeat the Emperors and achieve their goal? Or would they be utterly destroyed? As the 𝐻𝐿 Sunny nears Wano's shore, Ace will ask Luffy to take the rest of his crew and keep sailing, while he goes off on a solo mission to Sphinx Island nearby to meet up with an old friend. Things will go mostly the same once the Straw Hats arrive on Wano, and before long, Ace would join them to discuss things with the rest of the Alliance. He would be shocked to hear about what happened to Oden on Wano, and would be even more determined to bring Kaido down and avenge Whitebeard's former crewmate. While the meeting is going on, a sudden raid on the flower capital by Kaido would prompt Luffy to charge into action recklessly. Ace would yell to him to slow down, but we all know Luffy, and that's not happening. Ace would then help the Alliance members evacuate Oden Castle before it gets blasted away, while Luffy would end up in prison again, where he met Hyogoro and Kid. Believing that Luffy is strong enough to handle himself, even if he got caught, Ace would instead focus his efforts on intercepting the Big Mom pirates outside Wano. During his ambush, Marco will suddenly appear as well to even the odds, and together they'll launch Big Mom off her ship. All in all, the situation would unfold similarly to the main story. Just instead of King defeating Big Mom, it would be Ace and Marco. Big Mom would obviously survive this like in the original and would beat Chopper and Tama. Anyways, with one of the Emperors taken care of, Ace would head for Udon to free his little brother, but he'll arrive there at the same time Big Mom does. After Big Mom and Queen have their minor scuffle, with her memory back, she'll head for Onigashima. Ace would then make his move, coming out of the shadows to help Chopper and Raizo deal with the prisoners. Around the same time, Barco and Law will meet up to strategize about the raid together with Kinemon and other members. Once the plague gets dealt with, it's likely that Ace would spend some time in Udon with Luffy so they can both hone their advanced haki skills. Soon, the night of the raid would arrive, and the entire Alliance would sail to Onigashima. In this version of the story, the Alliance would include Spade Pirates, Marco, Jinbei, along with 3 supernova crews. Working together, they would quickly invade Onigashima, and the first thing Ace would do is search for his friend Yamato inside the structure. He'd eventually find him posing as Kozuki Oden. It would be a bittersweet reunion, but they'd have no time to chat, as Kaido would soon announce that he's holding Momonosuke hostage. Rushing to his aid, Yamato would leave Ace behind, promising to join up with him later. Making his way up to the roof, Ace would wipe out a few of the gifters on his way before finding Luffy and his friends already engaged in the battle. So Ace and Luffy would begin to fight Kaido, while Law and Kid struggle with Big Mom on a separate floor. Amidst the chaos, Yamato and Momonosuke would stop Onigashima from blowing up and attempt to keep the island afloat. After failing to deliver the killing blow multiple times, Kaido would get more and more aggressive fighting the duo up until Guernica intervenes and ambushes Luffy. Ace would be too late to stop this from happening and would watch his brother die in his arms. Fueled by rage, Ace would instantly awaken his Devil Fruit, and the battle field would get covered by scorching hot flames that'll disintegrate 𝗕𝗏𝗄 in seconds. This new power-up would help Ace fight against Kaido on equal footing, and he would even manage to land a few solid hits on him. However, this wouldn't be enough to stop a beast like Kaido, and soon after, Ace would fall on the floor exhausted, completely out of energy. But then, all of a sudden, Luffy's heart would start beating once more as he awakens in his legendary Nika form. Right in front of Ace's eyes, Luffy would beat Kaido in the same cartoonish way he did in the main timeline, and Ace wouldn't hesitate to jump in and help him. By the end of the night, the two brothers working together would absolutely obliterate Kaido, making the land of Wano free once again. After partying for some time after the battle, Ace and his crew would eventually leave Wano and go back to the Fishman Island to check up on it. However, while on their way there, a flashing beam of blinding light would stop the Spade Pirates in their track. The island they are familiar with, Lulusia, would suddenly get struck down with nothing left but a giant crater in the sea. Coming from that crater, Ace would notice a small ship with a familiar passenger on board, and he would burst into tears.